Our study from the scriptures today is going to take us to two places that are linked together because the first is a prophecy from the Old Testament, and the second is a place where Jesus references that prophecy in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, if you have a prediction of which prophet Jesus is going to be quoting, you're probably right. Isaiah is the most quoted prophet in the New Testament, and I would say in Isaiah in particular in Matthew has a lot of interconnectivity. Now, I say that with a lot of confidence. I didn't actually go count the number of times, so if you tell me it's also Amos, that would be closely in the running, and I might be convinced otherwise. But as you go through, you'll notice a lot of Isaiah in Matthew, and for good reason. The messianic prophecies there point towards Jesus. But in this case, we're going to be looking at something a little different. The prophecy of Isaiah that Jesus quotes in Matthew 13 is found in Isaiah chapter 6. And we're going to look at the chapter leading up to that in chapter 5 and a little bit from 6 as well to make some connections between these two lessons. Now, Isaiah and Jesus both teach an agricultural parable here. They use farming and the raising of food to set an example for the connection between the people who hear God's word, who listen to him, who do what he says, and the way that they behave. And we're going to look at the less familiar example in Isaiah first. If I tell you the parable of the soils, if you went to Sunday school or to VBS, you might already know that parable. It's also known as the parable of the sower, where the sower goes and he throws the seeds, and when they land on the path, the birds eat them. And if you're nodding along right now, you know what I'm talking about. We're going to get to that one in a bit. But I want to give you some groundwork for it first because I want to look at the Old Testament example. Jesus' audience, and especially his apostles, who get the explanation that involves this prophecy, probably know about Isaiah. And they probably know this prophecy. So what would they have heard when Jesus quoted it back to them? What connection would they have been making in their minds? That's where we'll start. All right, first of all, Isaiah chapter 5. We're just going to look at the first few verses here. It's a much longer section, and it goes on into sort of the doom that is prophesied to the people who were of Judah who were rebellious against God. But it starts with this, Isaiah 5, verse 1. I will sing for the one I love a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated. And briars and thorns will grow there. I will not command the clouds to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. Okay, so following on from that, the prophet has given this example here, and he goes on to expand on it and talk about the bad things that are coming, the woes and the judgments, as the heading in my Bible puts it, that are coming on Judah because of their sinfulness, because of their lack of ability to produce what God had established them to be prepared to produce. Now, we put in a garden this year, and we actually expanded our garden from what we had last year. And one of the things we did, because last year we put in a raised bed, is we actually planted stuff straight in the ground, right in the soil of our yard itself. Much like the example in our parable here, we removed a lot of stones from the ground. The part of Parkersburg we live in was built as an expansion as the city was growing in the middle of the last century. And so a lot of it was built on fill. And as a result, we've taken out pieces of concrete this big out of where our garden was, and just nails and glass and all kinds of stuff that you don't want when you're trying to till a garden. And as we were doing all of those things, we were making the soil ready for these plants. And we were rewarded, in most cases, with some good produce. Aside from the slugs and the various other things that come to cause trouble, we got the rewards back from doing the work of, hoeing this piece of dirt. But the Lord, on the other hand, in this example, through the prophet, didn't get the rewards of his hard work. Even though he prepared the vineyard well, even though he secured it so no one could come in and steal from it, it still didn't produce the fruit that he wanted, and he couldn't get the produce that he wanted out of his hard work. Verse 20 adds on to this by saying, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight." We're still continuing our spiritual anatomy series, and today we're going to be talking about the eyes in the spiritual realm. Because if I tell you something about eyes and you wear glasses, then you already know a little bit about what we're talking about here. If you take your glasses off, I'm either way more blurry than I need to be or more in focus than your Bible will be in your lap, right? Because we know what it means to have our vision obscured. If you get any kind of thing in front of your face, you can't see what it is that is at the end of the room. But the Bible uses eyes as a different kind of a metaphor. Now, while there are a lot of direct vision references, they are intended to be interpreted and not just read literally. There is a layer of poetic meaning on top of them. And one of the things about the eyes of our spirit, the spiritual eyes that we are to understand, is that they are not only just the light sensors of the brain that help you perceive the world around you, but they represent the focus of the person that possesses them. They represent the point where the thing that you are pointing your attention at. Now, this might be obvious, but let's think about it a little bit more. Someone is driving, and their eyes go off the road, onto their cell phone, onto the radio, onto the mirror so they can look at the kids in the back seat who are screaming at them. They have become a danger to the other people on the road if they're distracted for too long, because their focus and their attention, their eyes is no longer on oncoming traffic, deer stepping out into the road, whatever else danger may be coming, or even just a turn and a tree and a sudden stop. So your eyes spiritually are not just representing the things that you can see and perceive, but where your attention is. And then, if your attention and the direction you're going are in two different directions, you're going to end up in a ditch, spiritually speaking. So let's continue on a little bit by looking at the example Jesus preaches in Matthew. If you have a bookmark, go ahead and stick it right here in Isaiah, because we'll come back. We'll come back to this same area. But we're going to go over to Matthew for a minute so that we can prepare ourselves for the rest of our discussion. Matthew chapter 13. Now, Jesus is about to preach this parable of the sower, as it's said in my New International here. And it's also known as the parable of the soils. I'm not sure which one I prefer more. I mean, obviously the sower is the one doing the action, but the soils helps you determine which one we're talking about, because there's also the parable of the tares and the wheat, but that's about somebody sowing too. So anyway, they kind of get confusing if you don't give them clear names. But there's traditions and, about 2,000 years of people calling them different names behind me, so I'm not the decider who picks what we call these things. Anyway, parable of the sower. Matthew 13, verse 1 says the following. That same day Jesus went out of the house, and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered, because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. And still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, because of the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have in abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And this is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. And we're going to get that reference to Isaiah here in verse 14 in just a moment. So, remember our focus for today, the place where we're putting our attention, is on our spiritual eyes. We want to see what God wants us to see. We want to focus on what God wants us to focus on, because that will determine our direction. It will determine the outcomes of what we do. This is where the danger lies, in the gap between your heart and your eyes. I did not mean to make that a poem, but it did rhyme. We have an opportunity to fall into some problems if our focus and our heart are not lined up, if our eyes and our heart are not lined up. So, let's look a little bit at how Jesus uses this passage from Isaiah. We'll pop back to Isaiah and read it in its original context. Jesus says in verse 14, in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. Remember, he's talking about the crowds who he has to talk to in parables because he doesn't want them to fully get it right now. He wants them to think about it. He wants them to ruminate on it. He wants them to come back and say, oh, I think I got what Jesus was saying. But he can't just give it to them straight out. He says, in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused, and they hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Now, Jesus goes on to provide an interpretation of his parable from here. he tells the disciples straight out what each one of these things means. But each one of the things has a similar connection to what that vineyard had back in Isaiah. The purpose being that the sower, in this case the Lord, prepared the seed, which is the word of the gospel, and he spreads it on the hearts of people. And those who hear it and respond and provide fruit are the ones who had the good soil. And those who hear it and troubles come up and they're separated from it were the ones with the vines. Those with the rocky soil, it never really takes root and they wither away because any problems, persecution or trouble automatically removes their reasons to continue on. Oh, I misspoke, because the vines are actually wealth and worldly things that interfere. And then, of course, the path are the ones who, when the word comes, it doesn't even get to take root because the devil takes them away, and it takes the word away from their hearts immediately because their hearts are too hard to receive the word to start with. In the same way, the Lord prepared Judah to be a fertile place. He expected them to produce righteousness and goodness. He planted all the right vines, but when harvest time came, there wasn't a grape cluster to be found. So, here we go. We've got our unfruitful crops in both places. And we've got a similar message attached to them. But Jesus specifically says, when he's talking to the apostles, those people out there, they're focused on the wrong things. They can't see what you see because they're not really looking. They can't hear what you hear because they're not really listening. If you look again in verse 15 in Matthew, when he quotes it, he says, "These people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes." It's not that they are blinded. It's not that they are deafened. They just aren't paying attention, spiritually speaking. They've got their focus misdirected to someplace else. Jesus says, otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. Going back to Isaiah in chapter 6, we'll read this in the context of where it shows up. Now, if you were writing the prophet's book and putting it in order, you might put his origin story in chapter 1, verse 1. You might have, all right, Isaiah is going to be a prophet, so here's how it happened. This is what happened to Isaiah in order for him to become a prophet. But in the prophet's text here in Isaiah, the commission of Isaiah actually comes here in chapter 6. After this parable of the vineyard, we get to Isaiah's call to be a prophet. In Isaiah 6, verse 1, we see the following. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne. And the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings, and with 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds in the temple shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. "Woe to me," I cried, "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. And with it he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." Now, you've heard that, "Here am I, send me." You've probably sang it in a song in this very building. It's a good song. I like it a lot. You probably also sang that "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty" part as well, because that's in a song too. But did you realize that after "Here I am, send me" comes, this people isn't going to be a people who listens to you, Isaiah. These are the people who have their ears shut and their eyes closed. Isaiah, these people are never hearing, always hearing but never understanding. Always seeing but never perceiving. And not only that, listen to how God says it in verse 9. He says it in the imperative tense. Remember, that's the command tense. Verse 9, go and tell this people, go and tell them, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Now, Jesus said it like it was an observation. These people don't pay attention. It's just how they are. But God said, go and tell them. Now, listen to this very carefully. If God comes up and says to you, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving, make your heart calloused. Who receives that word? Who accepts that and obeys that command? It's kind of a contradiction, isn't it? Because if you're open to obeying the Lord and he comes up and says, quit listening to me, quit doing what I say, you're going to go, I think he might be slightly insincere in his command. I do want to listen to you, Lord. I do want to obey you. In fact, I'm going to assume that when you say, oh, harden your heart, don't listen to me, that what you're actually saying is, everybody else is already hardening their heart against me, and you understand, if you hear my words, that you need to turn towards me and do what is right, even more than you're already doing. Because if you are a listener, and if you are a seer, if you are a person who is perceiving and hearing intentionally and trying to understand the Lord and understand his heart and his character, and he says, quit listening to me, quit looking at what I do, then you already know his character is not someone who's trying to reject you and turn you away. It seems almost sarcastic, right? God is not being totally sincere and earnest and forthright when he says this. There's some sarcasm to it. I don't know the right word. Sarcasm almost sounds irreverent, like I'm giving God some sort of bad character quality, like I'm making him rude or something. But you can't take this literally, right? I hope we can understand that. You can't take be ever hearing but never understanding literally. But there's a big gap between the way Jesus said it and the way Isaiah said it, right? Jesus said it, as I said, as an observation. And then if you look at the Isaiah text, the Lord is saying it as a command. Very interesting. Let's go back to our main point. Let's think about spiritual eyes for a moment. In our bodies, you can't just see with your eyes. Because if you don't have a mind to perceive the signals coming off of your eyeballs, or if you break the connection from here to here, they stop being useful. That's one of the forms of blindness that people can develop, is from an injury or a disease that damages the nerve that goes in between the actual organ of the eye and the brain. If you can repair that, then the sight is restored. Because it's not the eyeball, the physical organ here in the front of your face, that does the seeing. It's up here. Now, spiritually speaking, what's our application for this? Now, we know that the heart, for our spirit, is the location that is given the name, this is what we give the name of all of our thinking, our deciding, our will, our determination, all of that. That's where it resides, spiritually speaking, in the metaphor of the Spirit. So what is the connection between the eye, our focus, what we look at, where our perspective is, and our heart? There can be an eye to the right thing that's connected to a heart that's not receiving the message. There can be an ear to the right thing with a heart that's not receiving the right message. Now, when Jesus said it, he said, these people's heart has become calloused, and they hardly hear with their ears, and their eyes have become closed. And in Isaiah, it says, make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. In both cases, there's a breakdown between what signals are coming in through the sensory organs, spiritually and physically, and the perception of what those things mean. One of the things that was really popular when I was a kid were these magic eye posters. Do you remember these things? Where if you stare at them just right and kind of cross your eyes, then something pops out and it's like a three-dimensional image. I could never do them. Turns out I have a slight astigmatism. And, without glasses to correct them, crossing your eyes and looking at a poster doesn't really make anything pop out, because one of my eyes is perceiving at a different distance. But the way that those work is by making your brain focus on something inside of what is actually there. It's not that it's really an illusion, it's just by using the ability that you have to perceive things in a slightly different way, you can draw out an image from those magic eye posters. You can make that 3D thing pop off the page. It's the same way that 3D glasses, have you ever watched a 3D movie? You got two eyeballs, and so what they do is they tell this eyeball that this is a little bit further away and this is a little bit closer, and then they whatever that 3D image is, looks like it's popping off the screen because of a trick that between your eyeballs and your brain that movie screen is doing with those special glasses that they have. What we are trying to say by saying all this is, with God's help, you can gain a better perspective on the mundane and the spiritual alike. But without focusing your eyes in the way that God intended, you cannot draw out the things that He sees. You cannot perceive things the way that He sees. Your heart will simply see things the way that the world does. Without knowing what to look for, without really having a heart that can interpret what that spiritual eye perceives, we will not really know what direction we are going in. We will not really know what it is we are actually perceiving. We could be stuck like these people, ever hearing but never understanding, ever seeing but never perceiving. And the result of that is not bearing fruit. The result of ever seeing and never perceiving, ever hearing but never understanding, is not bearing fruit. Look around, not literally in this room, but the churches that you know. Think about our brotherhood and people who preach the gospel right now. Think about the attendance in those church buildings that's going on all around us, around the world right now. We've got some areas of growth. We've been very blessed that Chandrasekhar, that we've been supporting in India, has been adding to the numbers there in India and been reporting some very favorable results over there. And we've been lucky enough to be able to accept some new attendees to our congregation recently as well. But is it growth the way that we're expecting? Is it spiritual growth for us as individuals? Because remember that losing your focus, that the eye not perceiving because the heart is hardened, results in a lack of produce, a lack of growth, a small harvest. The spiritual eye is emblematic of what one desires or prioritizes. When there's a breakdown between the heart and the spiritual eye, problems arise even deeper than just being blind. If you see, but you never truly perceive, then we've fallen into this trap. You could be focused on the right thing. We could be focused on all the right things. But if there is a disconnect between the eye and the heart, if the heart is hardened, if it doesn't matter if the eye can see. The spiritual eyes are a lesson that we're going to continue studying. This is going to be something that we'll continue to build on. But I wanted to start with this, because not only does it tie into what we've already been studying with the heart, but it gives us the most important part, the role that the eye plays spiritually. Because without the heart, the eye is simply just a stand-in for a particular part of the heart. I already told you that your eye spiritually represents what you desire or what you prioritize. In the Old Testament in particular, for example, in the Proverbs, he says that the haughty eyes and proud heart of an unplowed field of the wicked produce sin. That's in Proverbs 21, verse 4. So if you want to talk about producing fruit in a wicked way, there's another connection to our lesson for today. But your eyes and your heart are deeply connected in that regard. They set your direction and your focus, your eyes, and then your heart makes decisions on what to do based on those things. But as I said today, we can be looking at the right things, but not making the right decisions. And I hope we can reflect on this deeply in our individual lives. And the other encouragement is that we are more like the apostles than we are like the crowds. Because when I read you that parable and I read you the explanation, you were sitting there and you were perceiving and hearing and understanding Jesus' words. That doesn't mean we're not incomplete. And we still have room for growth individually. And we have room for growth congregationally. And we have room for growth as brotherhood of churches of Christ. And we have a room for growth as everyone who calls themselves Christians worldwide. But that only happens when our eyes and our heart line up. We do focus on what God would have us to do. I hope it's something we can reflect on deeply and continue to study as we go forward with our Spiritual Anatomy series. I appreciate your time and attention this morning. If anyone is subject to the gospel and needs prayers to the church for restoration or for encouragement, or if you need to be baptized for the salvation of your sins and you need to invite Jesus into your heart, we'd invite you to do that as we stand and sing.